It's 30 days since President Bola Tinubu was sworn in as Nigeria's 16th president, and he's wasted no time implementing his economic agenda. In his first 30 days in office, he's taken some bold and controversial decisions that have shaken the status quo and generated mixed reactions from Nigerians and even the international community. During his inauguration speech on May 29, Tinubu shocked many when he announced the removal of petrol subsidies. In another significant policy shift, the president announced his government's decision to unify the exchange rate, a move expected to enhance transparency, reduce distortions, and boost confidence in the naira. Other activities by the president so far include the inauguration of the Economic Council, the removal or suspension of the governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria, the dissolution of governing boards of government parastatals, the suspension of the EFCC chairman, the appointment of National Security Advisor, the retirement of service chiefs and appointment of new ones, the signing of the Student Loan and Data Protection Acts, respectively. Tonight, we extensively analyze the most significant economic decisions he's made in the last 30 days. We're joined by philosopher and executive director of Development Specs Academy, Professor Okey Ikechukwu. I'm Sulaiman Aled, and this is Arise Prime Time. Well, true to his words, President Bola Tinubu hit the ground running after his inauguration on May 29 and turned the conventional inauguration speech into a policy statement. In his first 30 days as president of the Republic of Nigeria, he has taken some bold decisions that have shaken up the status quo and generated mixed reactions from Nigerians and the international community. Some say President Tinubu has performed creditably well in less than a month in office and lived up to the expectations, while some disagree. Some of the high points of his first 30 days include the removal of petrol subsidy, the appointment of service chiefs, the appointment of National Security Advisor, dissolution of governing boards of government parastatals, the unification or convergence of the exchange rate, the suspension of the CBN governor, suspension of the EFCC chairman, just to name a few. Well, a month after the bold decision on subsidy removal was taken, the discussion between Labour and government on palliatives is still stalled. Now let's get some perspectives into the president's first 30 days in office. I'm now being joined by Professor Okey Ikechukwu. He's a philosopher and the executive director of Development Specs Academy, and also here in the studio is political scientist Professor Jibrin Ibrahim. Good to see you, gentlemen, and thanks for your time. Quite an interesting one. We won't wait till the first 100 days, so let's start off by looking at the first 30 days. I start with you, Professor Okey. You know, a lot of people would want to see how, in fact, we'll have a full plate. Now, let's see what we take off from the first. Now, the petrol subsidy was the very first. In his words, he said, it's gone. Just two words. Petrol subsidy is gone. And we're still reeling from that very statement. Tell us what that meant on Inauguration Day for the president and Nigerians.
Well, as a declaration on the Inauguration Day, it's probably indicative of a desire to say, I'm now in charge. A desire to let everybody know that, listen, whatever I want done, I'll place it on the table and we'll talk about it. He presented one exciting element, one worrisome element. The exciting element is that, oh, the courage to speak up or take action on this perceived fraud. The worrisome element being, well, is this how it's going to be? You wake up one glorious morning and hear an announcement, and it's a democracy. So that created some concern. But for me, what's on the table is fairly simple. The subsidy needed to go. Should have gone long ago. The presumed subsidy is a fraud because apart from Abuja, Lagos, Port Harcourt, a few state capitals in Nigeria, very likely less than 30 towns, that's where you buy fuel at the official price. Now, this fuel is subsidized. For the over 150 other million Nigerians who are not in the capital, they feel nothing about the subsidy. You go to the Niger Delta where the thing is done, you buy your fuel on a jerry can for the hinterland or your boat. It's been like that. I served there, and that's decades ago. Then you go to the southeast, there's no queue because the fuel had been subsidized for more than 15, 20 years. I mean, deregulated by the people. You travel out of Abuja. The moment you go beyond Suleja and some other places, it's no longer official price. You leave Lagos, you pass Ibadan, you're going to, is the same. So you needed to go. But the issues on the table, the impact on the citizenry, because in the absence of pay rise, and then movement cost has moved up, poverty is likely to emerge, not in itself, but through the things that on which people spend, transportation, food cost, maintenance, all other things. So I want to disaggregate it. It was a good decision. The subsidy needed to go. Now it has fallouts. Those fallouts must be addressed. My fear is that if he had actually waited beyond that day, we wouldn't have been able to remove fuel subsidy. So it reminded me of the kind of decision Obasanjo took the moment he was sworn in. He retired all the very senior military officers who had political exposure. If he had taken it to the next week or tried to consult, he wouldn't have been able to do it. It's an affirmation of manhood, it's an indication of leadership. The consequences will come, consequences always come. But to be able to say, here I am, that's what will make people say, yeah, there you are.
Well, we'll come back to looking at the fallout before we space it and talk more about that. Let me come to Professor Ibrahim. Listen to Professor Ikechukwu. One of the key things that comes to mind for philosophers like himself is the first cause. There's a first cause to everything, and he activated that. He said if he had waited, that would have been a difficult and arduous task for him to bring before the people. Tell us what you think about that very audacious statement on the day he was sworn in.
Well, I think leadership is really about being able to take decisions, being able to address issues that exist. As we were to find out subsequently, those two words were not even in his speech. So it was on the spur of the moment he decided to verbalize a decision he must have taken, that from day one he would address this particular problem. And if those two words are not in his speech, it's because his speech writers felt this is a delicate issue, and therefore you should give some time for planning. My sense is that it was important to take that decision right from the beginning, because it's a very difficult decision, and it's a decision that has created havoc for many previous administrations. You recall in 2016, President Buhari removed fuel subsidy, but subsequently he had to bow down to pressure and gradually bring it back and then take it to a level that no previous government had ever taken it, having said during his campaign that fuel subsidy is a fraud and that he's not going to tolerate it. And he left office as the president who wasted the most of Nigeria's money on a known fraud that's called fuel subsidy. So I think I agree with the point being made that it was a decision that needed to be taken. And if you need to take it, the earlier the better.
Now that brings us to the fallout, which is very important, because I'm quite sure you must have been speaking with some of your students and even Nigerians' relatives. And if you analyze and you look at the number of persons also on the side of the subsidy removal, it's growing, and it's amazing that for the first time in the history of Nigeria, many people are saying, yes, I agree, but. So let's address the but.
Okay, let's address the but. 2 days ago, I was at the University of Nigeria as keynote speaker at an international conference. And post-conference conversation was 100% on the fuel subsidy, not even other decisions he had taken. Unfortunately, you know, that's a community that travels a lot by public transport. So let us suppose you leave Abuja. You're going to the east. As you get to Lokoja, do you buy fuel at the pump price? All the way until you enter Enugu, do you buy fuel at the pump price? You leave Makurdi, the same thing. You leave Abuja to go to Katsina. At how many points do you buy fuel at the pump price? So it turns out that the subsidy given to me, you, and Prof, no protest from you, by the way, to supply fuel to other Nigerians. We've collected the subsidy. They are paying for non-subsidized fuel. That's what's going on all over the country. Diesel is worse. So by the time I put these facts on the table, the issue then is, this is putting the pinch on the people. It is. That has to be addressed. In addressing it, there are 3 or 4 things that should be taken into consideration. If government perception of palliative is limited to giving people money, let's suppose you give a family 30,000, very exciting. In 30 days, in a week, it's gone. So that's no palliative. Supposing there's a fishing community in Bayelsa, that the entire land has been taken over by oil spillage and all of that, and in that community you create a water reticulation system, create artificial ponds the size of this studio times 50, fishing begins, the local economy revives, you're alleviating poverty. Do you get the point?
So it's a better palliative.
Yeah, palliative that will recreate local economies. We are talking about a new government. Agriculture is fantastic. If you build dam, you get water, right? But when you build a dam, the amount of water going downstream reduces. So all local economies, fishermen, crab farmers, they die out. And that's why if you travel from the north to the south, you find that rivers that used to be about maybe 100, 200 meters wide, are now about 20 meters just in the middle. The entire place is dry land, they're building on it. So a whole review of development, the concept of development as distinct from alms giving. If you look at the entire Northeast, if you're going to make intervention there, you'll be thinking of what will recreate that environment, because reed desertification has occurred in many places after people left it. But what's going on there is distribution of mosquito nets and the rest of it. These are expenditure outlets that will not lead to development. So if you're talking palliatives, it is necessary, it is critical. You might want to consider, for instance, we have $800 million that's supposed to be given to the poor because of this. Okay. Supposing you remove school fees from all secondary schools, state, you know the equivalent, you know the number of students, fine. Here is the money from this palliative. Parents stop paying, use the money for something else. Primary school, the same thing. Now you're making meaningful interventions. Oh, okay, we discovered that this is the population of indigent students. Oh, this manufacturer association are having this kind of problem. This company, you find out that, since COVID, we've had more than a 48% close down of manufacturing companies. That's loss of jobs. So what businesses can we get to leverage? So they expand in the sense that they are able to employ. Yeah. Because corporate Nigeria won't do too much to help you. Banks post massive profits, but they make no impact on the economy, because if you look at their sources of income, it's mostly rent. It's not because they funded agriculture, created new jobs. I give you a loan, you give me X%. Now the rate, the interest rate, unless you're doing drugs, you can't go for those interest rates. Anyway.
Let me bring in Professor Ibrahim. Listening to Professor Ikechukwu, one of the key things, when he spoke about, his non-support for subsidy as it does exist, one of the key concerns would be, is it a one-off subsidy? And if it is, then it's not going to hold water. The palliative, it won't hold water. And the school system he's brought in, the school fees, which is, Nigeria is also known not to have good data. Our data collection is warped. But with school and school fees, this can actually be plugged into the data. Now, speak to us on some of the key things, the data challenges that the government or Nigeria has always had, knowing full well on how to identify those who need such kinds of palliative, in quote, is going to be a problem if that is not addressed. So we'll come back to data collection and the trust that we'll have on such data.
Well, the palliative can easily become another fuel subsidy, and we saw that very clearly during COVID, where the Ministry of Disaster Management claimed they were paying billions and billions of naira every month for school feeding. And we knew schools were closed, children were at home, and when that question was posed, the response was they traced the pupils and students. The question then becomes how? I believe that when the audit is done on some of those palliatives paid during COVID, it will be discovered that that's one of the greatest robberies in the history of this country. So that's the problem with palliatives. We do know that for the fuel subsidy, there has been a significant attempt to identify and map the poor in this country. This has been going on over the last decades. They do have a list of very poor families. There has been a history of conditional grant support to families. And part of the logic of conditional grant, and this has been based on a lot of research, is that when you identify very poor families, one of the issues is they don't send their children to school. Why don't they? They can't afford uniforms. They can't afford to give them money for food. So this 5,000 naira you are giving them is sufficient in many cases for them, for example, to send their children to school. So when it's run very well and when the data is strong, it can achieve very positive results. I think one of the challenges is for us to review this list of very poor Nigerians that have been done to ensure that it does reflect the real distribution of poverty in the country, and that those families can be identified easily, and they are the ones that actually get the money, rather than the officials who are supposed to send out the money just distributing it among themselves.
Well, quite a lot for us to speak of, about concerning subsidy alone, because listening to you both is stretching, it's expanding, going into even national planning, going into the NBS. But quickly, let's see if we can actually jump in on some of the other things. He actually wielded the big stick. We saw a lot of suspensions, dissolution of governing boards, of parastatals. But first, Dr. Ikechukwu, Professor Ikechukwu, were you surprised when the man who's visited him about twice or just paid him a visit, the chairman of the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, just barely 48 hours after visiting the president, the next we heard was his suspension?
Not entirely, but quickly, just 30 seconds
go ahead.
On the earlier matter. I think the Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs should be scrapped. There's NEMA. It should be totally scrapped. If also they're going to give palliatives, let them use the institutions of state. There are states, there are local government. Let's find some other means of dealing with the statistics. And people like Prof here can help. It's his line of work. But you migrate the money first to an amorphous entity in Abuja, who then begins. The overhead alone is offensive to hear. It doesn't need to exist as a ministry, because when you set up a ministry just to distribute money, you are announcing the absence of development. That's the point I thought I should put on the table. It's no progress to increase agencies that are managing poor people. Oh, we have now dashed money. But the number of poor people are increasing. That means there's no governance. The institutions of state are not functioning. There's no service delivery. There's no human capital development. But you are excitedly dashing money and expanding the job of this money dasher. No, it's wrong. Now, on the matter of somebody having visited the president and the fellow having gotten fired, first, official protocol and courtesy, agencies, heads of agencies could and should and ought to visit a new president, welcome him to office, or on their invitation. Maybe he has his reasons for wanting to see them, to see who they are, probably to also raise some issues privately with them or whatever. And then, based on also information available to him and in his capacity as president, hopefully with national interest in view, he can take executive decisions in that regard. And there's not just president, but that's a normal thing. The more critical issue is, and that's this whole idea of hitting the ground running. I think the man didn't hit the ground running. I think he was cycling in the air before he landed on the ground. Yeah, Prof mentioned that thing wasn't in his speech. I've had it too. Think of Reagan. Reagan went to the USSR, made that speech. The very statement that ended the Cold War was not on his speech. In his speech, he put it twice. They removed it. He didn't say anything. He read his speech, got to that point.
He spoke off the cuff.
Yes. Gorbachev, tear down these walls. I think 3 or 4 times. It wasn't in the speech. At that time. So now the removal of the head of the EFCC must have been informed by pre-inauguration information, because the impression one is getting from all they are doing now is that he must have a good team that worked around some of these things. So there are a lot of things he will do very quickly that will indicate control. But here are the issues. Issue number 1. Yeah. It had better for his own good be the case that those decisions are the right decisions, because they are foundational. It's on them you will build every other thing. Number 2, it's also important that in taking decisions that will attract applause, you foresee the challenges and you're ready for replacement gestures instantly. Number 3, and most critically, it should be mandatory that people see national interest. Even when they don't quite agree, they can't see motives other than national interest. They say, well, I don't like how he did it, but he did the right thing. Those are the things for him to focus on. Because as it is now, if you look at the entire template, the idea is by the time he's 100 days in office, there will be a lot. We should tell President Tinubu not to do 100 days in office. I think it was JFK who did it the first time. We don't need to do that. He's elected to lead. And if you look at all the precedents we've had, whether at state level, local government level, or federal, first 100 days in office. Now the fellow has 45 months in office. He goes out with a whimper all the time. If he's going to do it, it's going to cost a couple of billions. There'll be very excited speeches about how fantastic he has been. We don't need that. We're not children. This is a democracy a nation that should have matured by now after 60 years of independence and all of that. And so we'll do 100 years. You get people who will sing, wave the national flag, make publications on what he achieved in 100 days. It's a little, I don't want to use insulting. We should be busier than that. We should be busier than that. But before I come to you, Professor Ibrahim, I wanted to see if we can do this very quickly in 30 seconds. When you spoke about national interest, did you see that in the composition of the service chiefs? A sense of inclusivity and equity, yes. Totally, in very wide contrast to his predecessor. And by the way, this whole notion that he's doing a lot is also because he took over from a man who was not on the job at all. A man who didn't know what was going on, who said nothing and who did nothing. But yes, the spread of and composition of service chiefs shows that some thinking went into the kind of composition that will reassure Nigerians. Yeah, it was a good one. Well, the fight against corruption, Professor Ibrahim, is another aspect Nigerians are looking to see in the Tinubu presidency. So far, some heavyweights have been mentioned. If you go through the social media space, people are asking questions. Is the FCC only for Yahoo boys, or for the small fries? What about the big weights? And names have been mentioned before now. Matawale and Otom has been invited. And just recently, we saw Chief Edwin Clark also speaking of his former governor of the state, Dr. Okey. With this new man acting in the EFCC, what are we likely to see that will give the Tinubu administration a different color from the Buhari administration that everyone thought was all out to fight corruption?
Well, I think what Nigerians are hoping for is that since the man who came in to fight corruption, Muhammadu Buhari, failed woefully in fighting corruption, maybe the man who is assumed incapable of fighting corruption might be able to do that. I think one of the important points to make is that EFCC as an anti-corruption body always has a very tough fight in front of it because of the depth and width of corruption in this country. It is massive. So the number of cases you are looking at is intimidating. Secondly, a lot of corruption is anchored in people who are in politically sensitive positions. And that therefore there's always the fear within the organization that some people may be untouchable, and if you touch them, you may be getting yourself into trouble. But I think we must make the point that EFCC has improved beyond the organ for fighting Yahoo boys. That was its history, and that was at the very beginning. It has been directing its efforts at people who are politically anchored in Nigerian society. We do know at least 2 governors have been jailed by the EFCC, and that the EFCC also faces very tough tasks because some of the politically connected people cannot be touched while in office, and when they are out of office, they have access to a lot of legal support and sometimes judicial support. This trend now in the judiciary of a judge saying somebody cannot be investigated, cannot be arrested, cannot be interrogated by the EFCC is very strange, because when the Nigerian state sets up a body as an anti-corruption body and a judge says, no, I like that person, you can't touch him, then you are making it impossible for such organs to play their role. And I think one of the things that has to be addressed on this matter is to convince the National Judicial Council to come out openly and say there are no sacred cows in this country, and that everybody for who there is reasonable suspicion of involvement in corrupt deals, then the anti-corruption bodies have the right and indeed the duty to investigate them and prosecute them if there is a basis for that prosecution. So I think that's one issue that has to be addressed. The EFCC itself, I think, has really large capacity to do its work. And if they're supported by the powers that be, there's a lot that can be achieved by the organization. But I think it's also the moment to see how you can empower the EFCC. Clearly, under the last administration, they lost some of their powers to the Attorney General of the Federation, who has now the powers to decide whether they can prosecute or not. And I think that power stripped from the EFCC has to be returned to them to give them the teeth to be able to act when they do set out to act.
Well, it's an interesting moment for us having 2 professors, eloquent professors in the studios. I'll come back to you both. If you just joined us, you're watching Arise Prime Time. We'll take a moment. We'll come back shortly to explore, expand Tinubu's administration in the last 30 days. Welcome back to Arise Prime Time, where we offer perspectives on the news and talking points of the day. Still in the studios with me, Professor Jibrin Ibrahim, who is also the chairman of the editorial board of Nigeria's Premium Times newspapers and senior fellow at the Center for Democracy Development. Also, Professor Okey, Ikechukwu, who is a philosopher and executive director of Development Specs Academy. Thank you both, gentlemen, for taking time out to be here to discuss national matters. Quickly, before we delve into some others, I still would want to take Professor Ikechukwu on the fight against corruption before we open up what else we have on the plate.
Well, now on corruption, the EFCC Attorney General mix-up. What has happened is that there's a perception of visible and questionable engagement or interference, if you like, from the office of the Attorney General. But actually, in fact and in principle, my understanding is that the EFCC is prosecuting on behalf of the Attorney General. I think that's in law too, so but that can be verified. And to that extent, it resides within the office to determine prosecutions he wants to continue with, unless that changed from what I knew all along. then the fight against corruption itself, if it must go on, the trajectory has to change.
Yeah.
They are doing thief catching, not fighting corruption. Corruption is distortion of values. So if I've stolen some money, I've violated the rules of entitlement, is at the level of values. If I have distorted promotion, it's corruption of the process of progression in the profession. So because we don't realize that corruption is first of all a distortion of values, we think that those who are corrupt are those who have caught for taking money. No, that's not it. But in the question of administration of anti-corruption wars, see what I think would happen and we'll be on the right track. Now, here is a minister who is seen to have embezzled maybe 800 million naira, and he's taken by EFCC. Everybody is shouting, even people in the ministry, even the PAMSEC. Imagine that the minister is arrested. At the same time, the PAMSEC is invited to tell the EFCC or ICPC what he knows about this. The Director of Finance and Account is invited. The department, the Anti-Corruption Monitoring Unit in the ministry, the head is invited. Then the Savicom desk, because Savicom was set up in 2004 to ensure that every money spent provided some service for Nigerians. So Savicom is invited also. And then Due Process Office is invited. I tell you, nobody, but when you isolate politicians and people are talking, the facilitation of the process of violation, whether contract inflation, whether contract splitting, it went through the procurement unit as well. Imagine that just one person is invited, that's about 9 invitees in addition to the person you say has embezzled money.
That's a long chain of gatekeepers.
If you do that twice, there's no officer in the ministry that will facilitate that fire. The Director of Finance said, okay, Mr. PAMSEC, you're the administrative head of this ministry. This money was spent. Can you tell us about it? Sir, you're Director of Finance and Administration in the ministry. Please tell us about this. Oh, you have a procurement unit. Fantastic. This expenditure is also under procurement. By the time all these people are singing, you bring in Savicom, which has an office there. Heaven knows what it does with it. Has a desk. You have anti-corruption monitoring unit, actually transparency monitoring unit. The first transparency monitoring unit was set up by my boss in transport ministry. Ujoma Doeko was transport minister. He set the first one up, and then we went to meet with the then head of ICPC, Justice Alabi. I think that's Akombi.
Akombi.
Now, the point was, for me, when the entire terms of reference were drawn up and he said, okay, Doc, look through this, I told him it was unnecessary. He said, why? I said, everything here falls under the PRS. Don't join in multiplying agencies and all of that. Eventually he did, but the point I'm making is this. When that happens, 2 things will happen. It will be impossible for a chief executive to get away with this, even in the process. Number 2, if he gets away with it, it's going to drag a long chain. And now the alertness is thrown down the ladder. It's not just the minister. It's not just the MD. It's not just, it's everybody who was involved in the processing. Even if you did nothing, you will come and convince ICPC or EFCC that, look, yes, this file passed through your table, but what was written there, please forward to Deputy Director. They will release you. Now, that's anti-corruption fight.
You know, speaking of which, let's talk about fight. And the fight against banditry, terrorism is another one. And the new president didn't waste time. First, he made Nuhu Ribadu an advisor, and now he's the national security advisor. Some have said it was a fine appointment. Some others have a little bit of, you know, if and buts. Tell us what you think about Nuhu Ribadu coming as the NSA.
First of all, I think that's re-establishing the origins of that office, where in its early years it was led by police officers with intelligence background, because that's really the core work of a national security advisor, is to look at trends in terms of security breaches, the sources of those trends, actors involved, and above all, a collective strategy on how to address those threats that are disturbing the peace. So I think it's really good that a retired police officer is brought to the job, and he's somebody who is also bold, who is able to take decisions, who is always at the forefront of action from his pedigree that we're aware of. So I feel that it's a good thing he's in that position, because at the end of the day, there are two things in doing that job well. One is to put together the intelligence from various sources and use that to develop an approach to address the problem. And secondly, to coordinate the work of various agencies. Don't forget the National Security Advisor is an advisor to the President. So there isn't any issue of hierarchy. Whenever he develops his counsel to the President and the President accepts that counsel, the President is in a position as Commander-in-Chief to make sure that the directives that are issued are actually fully implemented. I feel one of the tragedies in this country is over a 30, 40-year period, we lost capacity of the police to do its work. Because all these issues we're talking about should really be work that should be addressed by the police, which is in charge of internal security in the country. But a number of things happened to the police. One, they focused too much on VIP guard duties, so that a significant number of police personnel are involved in VIP, and VIP, which was originally just top government officials, got translated into anybody with money can go and buy for police security. And what that did is to divide security, to create a situation where security is available for those who can pay for it, but the general populace had no security, and that was how there is breakdown of security at the local level became the general principle. So I think one of the advantages too here is to get this office to help the President in reform of the police so that they can gradually begin to take over their core function, which is the provision of internal security for the Nigerian people.
Let me bring this to you, Professor Ikechukwu, and it's going to be holistic as well. Listening to Professor Ibrahim, the IG, Ikechukwu, has his job cut out. He's already started speaking as if he's heard your point, talking about the VIPs. And this is also happening side by side with the service chiefs that are already there, plus the man at the customs. Someone said he's excited at least they have someone within the customs who would also adorn their uniforms. But anyway, that's for another day. Speak to us on how the reform that the police badly need at this point in time can translate into better policing and civil acceptance of policing and police as our friend.
Well, first, it's not about talking. Yes, the new IG has spoken, but there are questions he must also answer. Do I have the personnel? There are too few policemen. That's a factor. Even though he's made an announcement, we've had such announcements in the past several times about the withdrawal of sirens, about the withdrawal of personnel. It never translated beyond some news. After 2 weeks, it goes back because most of those involved are the owners of Nigeria, quote and unquote. So we've had the announcement. Now, what's the level of skill training of his personnel across board? What's the level of equipment? The police is understaffed, the police is under-equipped, and in many places held in contempt, not because it's set out to perform badly, but because it's not equipped to perform properly. That's where the real problem is. So that whereas his enthusiasm and commitment is understandable, he needs more than an adult dose of realism in order to move forward. So police reform. That means the thing already has a form and you're trying to readjust it. It may have become stiff there and will break. Take, for instance, SARS. After the end SARS, I think it was renamed, what now? They said they were taking through some weeks of, what do you call it, reorientation.
And rehabilitation.
Rehabilitation. You can go and tell that to people who are on drugs or people who are slightly mentally unstable. I've been on the road for the last 7 years. I've been collecting money. I've been doing all sorts of things, which is not my job as a policeman. And that's how I've been actually living the way I'm living. You put us in a space for 3 weeks. You're telling us how to be of good behavior. And most of us are over 35, 45, clocking 50. We'll listen politely and leave the place. That's the end of the matter. But should we lose hope? No. So what is it that needs to happen? First, the IG, even before, you know, by law, the governor is not the chief security officer of his state. The IG, the commissioner, doesn't have to take quote and unquote. It is wrong, but the law, that's the provision. Now, there's a way, that's how you understand how to use state power. To achieve results without bothering with the letter. Commissioners, you must work very closely with the governors. Mr. Governor, please, if there's any order you want my commissioner to obey, let me know. I will tell him. So that way the governor will appear to be, do you understand? Yeah. That power play behind the scene creates a harmony that nobody will see what's going on. The other thing that needs to happen also is for the IG to, you know, and this is more of the governors and the body commissioner. When Marwa was governor in Lagos, I was on the Guardian editorial board. So on one occasion, we went to interview him. I was ordinarily not supposed to be on the interview, but the MD said I should accompany them. He had introduced Operation Sweep, which was a patrol, police patrol, I think combined military patrol all over Lagos. Crime disappeared completely from Lagos State. So when we got there, all kinds of questions were being, I said, Your Excellency, I need to know how it was possible for you to make crime to disappear all over Lagos, Mushin, Ojuelegba. How? He said, well, listen, this thing is very simple. I was a military attaché in the US. I just simply decided to adopt the New York security model. I said, can we have, I said, sir, you're giving news headline. Now let's have the details. He laughed. He said, what does it mean? Every night there's a security report on a number of incidents. So where you have more incidents, you send more patrol. Now there's a lot of robbery going on in Mushi, Olorun Shogo, all those places, Morocco. But there's none in Ikoyi. You have 6 patrol vehicles in Ikoyi and 1 in Mushi. So what did he do? Switch it. That was all. So that preemptive intelligence is not limited to knowing that somebody will tell you that thieves are coming. It's to check the pattern. And the same thing happened I think that was when Peter was governor in Anambra. We did a youth program. And from assessing the behavior of the young people, I called him, I said, Mr. Governor, there's very likelihood that this part of the state is likely to have a higher camera. He said, how did you know? I said, the boys coming from the training, most of them, their comportment is, he said, you're correct. So that has to happen. In addition, managers of correctional facilities, that's prison, they should always be at security meetings. They should always profile the ethnic configuration of criminals in prison. That's how many people come from this area. Configure what types of crime brought them to prison, etc., etc. That way you have a holistic, and that's where I think Ribado's background will come in. But let us also note that, yes, he's been a police. I think there was a time a professor was head of it, was NSA, I think, in the past. Yeah. So it's always been there. But also some of the military, particularly army officers who have served, they have also served very well. What might appear to then happen with this new development is that hopefully all the institutions of state will take on their proper assignments. The police today is unarmed, really, if you're talking about taking on any kind of even internal security functions. And also, it should recruit more, train, but the military, the army in particular, has to withdraw from the streets. It is not good for the image of the army because you're demobilized. People who are, a soldier is not trained for wrestling, he's trained to kill. Take on real aggression. Now, but I guess all these are matters for another day.
And again, I think also using the word correctional, which Nigeria has adopted. I think it's still debatable.
Whether it's prison or whether they are correcting anything at all.
Because it does look like you're adopting something elsewhere, and you say, okay, it's now correctional. Now let's see if we can close on this. We're coasting home, and in the midst of all of this, you know, Professor Ikechukwu said he started well. He was, but the problem now is how to sustain the momentum. That Nigerians are not waiting for every 100 days or 200 days. They want to see you work and perform. And looking at the composition so far, because in the days to come, we're likely to see the list, the ministerial list, which again, now let's go out of what we've seen so far and see the caliber, the kind of resume, the attitude, the persona that we should see in people that will work with the president as ministers?
Well, I think maybe the first point I want to make is that part of what we've seen over the last 30 days is supposed to be what is normal for all new governments.
What is normal?
Yes, that they have a governance plan. They've identified policies they want to implement. They've identified strategies, and they put it on execution from day one. That is what's normal. But because we are coming from an 8-year period of non-governance, I think there's a sense in which we are overpraising President Tinubu, because what he is doing is what he should be doing. You've been looking for power for so long, you've campaigned, you had a manifesto and all that. And when you actually go back and look at President Buhari's My Covenant with Nigerians, all the policy actions outlined there, including fuel subsidy removal from day one, they are all in Buhari's plan. But what did he do? He put it aside. He decided not to make appointments. It took him 5 minutes to decide he wanted ministers and all that. So there was a deliberate decision on Buhari's part not to govern Nigeria. And Tinubu is showing he's different, that well, he's aware that when you contest to be president is that you want to govern, and therefore he's here to govern. But I think a lot of the consequences of this type of initial fast action is that you have to be careful not to overheat the policy. I was hearing rumors that the oil marketers are saying they want to lift the price of petrol from 500 to 700 naira. And there I think they need to be very careful, because Nigeria has a very deep poverty. People are really on edge. They are suffering. So you need to be careful that you don't overheat the policy and cause an explosion. And I think at this point, he has to look carefully at the scheduling and prioritization of the policy rollout to make sure that he doesn't upset the apple cart. I think that's really important for him.
Thank you, Professor Jibrin. Professor Ikechukwu, if we can do this in a minute, quickly. I know, don't worry, we're going to have a series of this, but again, in a minute, quickly, on the same projection of the caliber of persons that will be working with the president in the coming days.
He should get competent people with hands-on experience. They could be professors, but not professors because they read books, but because they have the experience, they've interacted with the environment. So what's bringing them on the job is not the title, but what they can do. So it doesn't matter, it's not about title, it's not about origins. But the other thing is that you have competent people from every part of the country. So competent people, sound policies, effective implementation, and then monitoring and evaluation for feedback. If he has competence around him, there will be little, even where there are mistakes, they can be explained. The arrogance of his predecessor and those around him, which was just to carry on and no explanation on the few occasions he carried on anything actually, you know. So that has to change. But as for the current excitement, yeah, the policies are exciting, they are good, they show resolve on his part, but the excitement is also because he moved He took power from somebody who was totally absent. You know, if you take over a position from somebody in coma, even if you twitch a finger, it will look like a superstar. So let's not forget that element.
You just reminded me of my African philosophy class. It's a fun place for us to leave it, Professor Okey, Ikechukwu, and Professor Jibrin Ibrahim. I do hope that we'll find time to do this again, perhaps next week, midweek, if we can come back and speak more about developments in our country. Many thanks for your time. While you're watching Arise Prime Time, this is where we say many thanks for being such nice company. I'll see you again. I'm Sulaiman. Bye-bye.